what advice would you give to those who are going into the film industry and also Christians in general in how to approach movies, especially in the culture that we're living in today?
Yeah. So that's a super interesting question and one that I asked myself. Some of you may know from my background that I went from being Mennonite kid in Saskatchewan, Canada, who was worship leader and youth pastor and got invited to join the movie industry that I always wanted to be involved with. And this is legitimately a question that I sought out pastors and other people to ask, how should I do this? I thought of myself, the justification I gave myself was that I'm going to go be a missionary there, because if no one else in the company I was working for, was going to be a Christian, I was going to go there. I was a rather young man, naive perhaps, thinking I was going to walk in there, heart of San Francisco, and be the salt and the light. And in some ways, I learned that maybe I was in a weird way. But Frank, I wish that I'd actually gone and sought the advice of people actually in the movie industry at this point in time. The other thing I got, of course, was that people were assuming that I was going to be corrupted instantly by evil Hollywood and these new age ideas. It's interesting to me that my Christianity completely survived my entire Hollywood experience, not only being in California, but in the years of working in movie industry after that in Canada. My Christianity survived the movie industry. So I guess I'm very curious. Frank, how will Frank answer this question?
A good question. We need Christians in every industry, moral industry. You're going to be tested, though, as to how far you can go into immorality, and you're going to have to draw bright lines before you get in there. But if you can influence films for good, you ought to.
So Frank is giving this young lady, I think it's a young lady, forgive me if I got that incorrect, this question asker, some bit of a naive advice again, in that when you're at the entry level of the film industry, your influence is pretty near zero. If you are one of, 2,000 visual effects artists on a film, or if you are, script supervisor, if you're any of these like entry level type positions, yeah, your influence on the product that's coming out is negligible. Where you can influence people is, again, to be the salt and light around people around you, and perhaps ideally to have people who, will ask you questions. And again, having worked in it a bit naively, this notion that the people in Hollywood want everyone who works on their film to be live some kind of corrupt lifestyle, and that's a goal, and they want to get you and make you. No, what they want is responsible workers. What Hollywood wants is, if you're a gaffer, they want you to be able to properly, work with electricity and be alert and awake enough, and awake at 5 in the morning when you're on set. Like when you're on set, especially, they don't want you to be sinning. Ideally, they want you, because you're working long days and they need your full attention. And people who are hungover or anything like that, or straying or distracted, that's a big no-no. Now, you get stories of famous actors and famous directors who end up being that way, but that's not what they want. That's not what Hollywood is trying to churn out. Despite what you may think of their product, they definitely don't want their employees that way. That was a fear that I could have helped waylay that misconception for those who in my life were concerned when I went off to Hollywood. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but this person entering Hollywood is unlikely to actually affect what goes on screen, at least in terms of any morality presented or that kind of thing. Fair enough of an answer. Perhaps they have a very, very slight influence, and you should use that influence for God if you're a Christian. Fair enough.
And what we do in Hollywood Heroes is we point out the films that we think have stolen from the greatest story ever told.
So some of you may have seen my debate with Frank Turek on the Unbelievable show, and I've actually been putting a few clips of that up here on my live channel, but go seek it out if you'd like. Frank Turek, Paulogia, Unbelievable show, and we discussed at length his book that he's talking about here. Now, in this book, he's alleging that stories like, I forget the first three of the slash, but I know Star Wars and Harry Potter were two of them. Now we see Captain America, Wonder Woman, Batman. The notion is that these stories stole from the Bible in terms of their core storytelling, but I'll let him finish that thought.
And that's the story of Jesus. And the common thread running through all these movies we get into is sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So sacrifice. So apparently, stories before Jesus didn't think that sacrifice was a virtue. The first time anyone considered that sacrifice was a virtue, even despite, yay, Isaiah 53, talking about the suffering servant who would be sacrificing. Oh no, it's Jesus. First story ever where sacrifice was considered virtuous. Oh, or we could go back to stories like Prometheus, or Osiris, or Hercules, or, and I had to look some of these up, but Ku Yuan in ancient China, and Inanna in ancient Sumerian, Inanna in ancient Sumerian. Inanna was a character again who gave up their life so that a lot of other creation could happen. Kuyan, similar story in ancient China. Lots of stories in Asia. So, like self-sacrifice has been a common theme for many thousands of years, long before Jesus. Again, the Greek god stories, like Hercules, for example, people sacrificing themselves for other people, not new. And it's entirely explained through evolution and biology. We are a social species. And so anytime where one individual member is going to sacrifice themselves for the survival benefit of the group, that's obviously going to be vaunted as a virtue. Those are the kind of characteristics that social species is going to want to encourage. So yes, these kind of stories, I can't believe the Christians are so focused on themselves that they somehow think that they have a monopoly on sacrifice stories. It's awful. I can't believe that they put this forth and that people take them seriously. That this is among the worst arguments that they make.
What people find beautiful, because it is. You know what people don't find beautiful? Follow your heart.
What people don't find beautiful, follow your heart. So again, it depends on what you mean by follow your heart. Now, Frank means be selfish, I think. That's the best steel man I can give to him. That the opposite of sacrifice would be selfish, and therefore follow your heart, would be what he considers to be thing. But that's so crazy because so many stories, especially modern stories, absolutely celebrate follow your heart. Give me a very brief list that I just off the top of my head before the show. Pursuit of Happiness, Brave, Ratatouille, Dead Poets Society, Bucket List, Eat, Pray, Love. These kind of movies absolutely praise, and we do praise people who have the courage to find fulfillment in themselves that isn't always about sacrificing for others. We absolutely do celebrate those things. We love those kind of stories. Any kind of story where it's not a self-made man, but the kind of person, any triumph that is Rudy, maybe another great example where it's just, it's the triumph of the human spirit type stories where you find a way to succeed in spite of obstacles against you. If that's what you mean by follow your heart, no, we do love those stories. Now, movies and stories about people who are selfish, we do. Yeah, we love to hate those kind of characters, and there's some comeuppance, and selfishness in and of itself isn't the problem. But, you look at Michael Douglas on the movie Wall Street, and, greed is good. There's all kinds of ways to have characters be relatable to us, both selfish and selfless. All these kind of stories are just human stories. So this may not rile you up, but it riles me up because this is, thus the other side passion of my heart is these kind of films and these kind of stories. And Frank is just grinding it down to its lowest common denominators and trying to use it to sell Christianity. And that bothers me. And he's wrong. If he was right, it'd be a different thing.
Actually, that's what the culture says. But if you tried to put that on the big screen, people would go, like, spoiler alert.
I literally just listed a bunch of movies. I could have listed 100 more. There were follow your heart stories that people love on the big and small screen.
How many have seen Endgame, right? In Endgame,
Frank has seen like 5 movies, I'm convinced. So I read his book. He co-wrote it with his son. And I feel like Frank, and he's a man he's 70, if not close to that. I mean, natural in life, I think your passion for watching every single movie that comes out sort of diminishes over as the years go by, and that's fine. I think Frank's son picked the films that they're going to watch. Anyway, Endgame. What if Tony Stark had been selfish in Endgame? Well, fine. I think I'll let him finish his point and see.
Imagine if Tony Stark gets to Endgame and he's about to take on Thanos and he goes, guys, I'm just not feeling it today. You know, I don't want to take on Thanos. I got to get back to following my heart and taking care of just me. And then
So, I mean, setting aside the fact that it's interesting that they made some AI art for this, and the piece that they made was presumably to avoid copyright, which is funny because these top-rated characters. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The AI art that they picked there was, Tony with his daughter, I Love You 3000. Tony absolutely had his offspring in mind when he did the snap. And he thought that whole film was, if I help you bring everyone back, you can't erase my daughter. This is just completely affirming the evolutionary story I was just talking about, is the thing that we care most, or that we're biologically driven to care most about, is protecting our inner circle of our genes, and then our tribe, and then like the people around us. We have these concentric circles of care that we care about up to our species and keeping it propagated. And Endgame really is a great example of showing that Tony was selfish in that way, in that he wanted his legacy to carry on. Now, it's selfless in that he obviously loved his daughter, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for that there would be a world that his daughter, could live in that wasn't ruled by an evil titan. I mean, that's all fair, but it's a terrible example, Frank. And yeah, would the movie have been great if Tony was selfish and didn't selfish in a way of that he like took his daughter and wife and flew off to another planet and hoped to hide? Well, maybe not. I get it. But you're cherry picking the parts you want and leaving the parts that affirm the naturalistic biological explanations why these stories are so compelling to us.
The movie ends. Would anyone go, inspiring? He turned his tail and ran. He followed his heart. No, he didn't go, terrible. The same thing is true in real life. We are inspired by people who will sacrifice themselves to save others. That's what Jesus does for us.
Which is yet another reason, argument for the Gospels just as successful literature, right? They're the kind of literature, the Joseph Campbell-esque literature, that contains the elements that resonate with human hearts throughout centuries and time. This whole self-sacrifice of Jesus, yeah, that's inspiring. And the fact that we get something out of it, what could be more selfish than, hey, Jesus died for me. He cares about me. He loves me. I bet you can hear a cat in the background. I'm sorry about that. What's more selfish than that Christian story ultimately? I mean, it's just literature that is in the same pattern of all these other literatures. That's the point that's the thing you're giving us, Frank. You're handing us on a platter. The Bible's not any different than Superman.
So I think we've got to show people the good things that come out of some of these movies and show that if you love Iron Man, you're going to love Jesus.
Okay.
If you love Harry Potter, you're going to love Jesus.
That is actually interesting. I think I've talked about that on the stream. The one thing Frank's book did convince me of is that J.K. Rowling very much was patterning her stories of Harry Potter after Jesus and biblical stuff. And even though it was conservative Christians who hated Harry Potter when they first came out in the early 2000s, maybe earlier than that, I forget exactly when it was, 2000s were the movies at least, those same conservative Christians, now that the story is over and now that J.K. is on their side about a lot of social issues, Christians are whitewashing and redeeming Harry Potter in these weird ways. But maybe I'll go into it if you guys care. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. Would you actually be interested in seeing that argument about how Harry Potter follows Jesus? I don't know if it's pretty actually transparent compared to these other films, even including the one he's going to mention next.
If you love Frodo, you're going to love Jesus.
Of course, the author, J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings and the whole creator of Middle Earth, was a Catholic, was a devout Christian who, there's lots of religious imagery in here. Unlike C.S. Lewis, though, it's my understanding that J.R.R. Tolkien was very much against allegories. And so a lot of the allegorization that people are making of his work these days, I feel like he wouldn't appreciate and wouldn't like, unlike C.S. Lewis. But again, another side tangent.
All of these heroes in the movies in some way embody the greatest hero of all time, Jesus.
No. Well, I mean, maybe Harry Potter did, but all it takes is for this basic biology of appreciating empathy and valuing self-sacrifice, valuing empathy, valuing people who help others, because that's the kind of thing a social species is going to value. So, sorry, Frank, you've overextended yourself on this one. At least I think. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. Did Frank make a compelling point? Or am I sweeping this aside? Or am I sweeping this aside too easily? Let me know.